Good morning and welcome back to the next segment of our program. I am Stephen Stichter with the Board on Atmospheric Sciences and Climate at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I'll be the panel moderator for this segment of the summit. And in this segment, we're bringing representatives from multiple executive branch agencies and local partners together virtually for a panel discussion. Now I'd like to have each panelist briefly introduce themselves, and including their home agency and a few words about what they do. Chris, can you start?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Strong from the National Weather Service. Now the National Weather Service has our headquarters downtown, but we have field offices all across the country, and I work at the one that serves the Baltimore, Washington metro area and most of the mid-Atlantic here. So our office puts out, most of those weather watches and warnings that you get through the course of the year here. And my specific role, in addition to helping run our office, is to be more or less our public information officer.
Great. Stacey?
Great. Yes. Hi, I'm Stacey Underwood with the Army Corps of Engineers Baltimore District. I'm the Silver Jackets coordinator and the Flood Risk Management Program Manager. I'm a civil engineer. I work in the planning division, and I've been working with the Corps for about 30 years. For the last 20 years, I've focused on flood-related studies and projects and working with communities to help them reduce their flood risk. And as you will hear shortly, I've been working extensively with a number of states and the District of Columbia over about the last 10 years, helping to make them more flood resilient through the Silver Jackets program. And glad to be here today. Thanks.
Melissa.
Morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Diaz, and I am the Acting Chief Resilience Officer for the DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, where I oversee the implementation of the Resilient DC Plan, which I will be speaking a lot more about in a few moments. I also oversee our Resilience Bureau, which includes critical infrastructure, hazard mitigation, business emergency management, disability integration, and community outreach. I've actually only been with the agency since March, but before that, I worked on the district's Climate Ready DC Plan, which is in our Department of Energy and Environment. So just changed agencies, so I've been with the district for a while. All right, that's me.
Thanks. James.
Hi, I'm James Garvin. I've been in the federal government 10 years, mostly as the general engineer at this facility at National Archives downtown. And I've recently just become the facility manager. So that's me.
Great, thank you all. Now let's begin our discussion. This morning, we'll be examining the topic of the changing weather in the National Capital Region, extreme weather, and changes in climate. For all of those who are participating, at the end of the discussion, you will be able to participate in a question and answer session with our panel. Please use the chat function in Zoom to submit your questions, which we will then pass on to the panelists. I'd like to direct our first question to Chris Strong of the National Weather Service, Baltimore, Washington Forecast Office. Chris, our understanding of climate change, its drivers, the expected impacts, has grown significantly in recent decades. Regarding the National Capital Region weather profile, what are some of the most telling trends and changes that you have observed in the last 20 years?
Well, in addition to temperatures gradually rising, and we just updated our normals for the country and for Washington, looking ahead at winter, just about every month has their temperatures a little bit higher than we used to 10 years ago. That's making our snowfall season a little bit more erratic from year to year, more years that have single digit snowfalls and lesser impact, but also still maintaining those big heavy hitter winters from time to time. The growing season expansion, the cherry blossoms that we're all keen on during the springtime, the average bloom date of that getting earlier and earlier. I mean, those are all telling trends, but I think the most important one is one of the biggest weather killers that there is, and that's flooding. And certainly exceptional rainfall events happening in populated areas, especially urban areas, is a very troublesome trend that we've seen over the past several years, certainly over the past decade. And, being that the biggest direct weather killer that there is, that powerful force that is rushing water, I think that's one of the biggest things that we'll have to deal with and evolve with as the years go ahead, to keep people as much as we can out of harm's way.
Great. And you are seeing a change in that flood and exceptional rainfall events over that 20-year period?
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, and certainly we saw what happened in Philadelphia and New York just recently. We had a national capital region flash flooding emergency just a couple of years ago. The national mall flooding that we had about 10 or 15 years ago. So we're going to be doing some local studies on that in the months and next year or two here to really start putting some numbers to this. But that's certainly what we're seeing.
Great, thanks. Next question for Stacey Underwood of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Baltimore District, and the Silver Jackets program. Stacey, for anyone who is here who may not know, who are the Silver Jackets and what is their mission?
Well, good question. Thanks, Steve. The DC Silver Jackets team is really just an interagency team that coordinates and collaborates and works together to reduce flood risk in the District of Columbia. As the Corps of Engineers started the program back in about 2010, trying to stand up Silver Jackets teams in each state. Now all 50 states plus DC, Puerto Rico, and Guam all have Silver Jackets teams. The DC team has been active since about 2013, and it was formalized in 2014 with a memorandum of agreement. And you're probably wondering where the name Silver Jackets come from. It is a little unusual, but it's meant to symbolize all of the agencies working together for the mission of flood risk management. And basically just symbolizes, during a flood emergency, the Corps responds wearing red jackets, FEMA's wearing blue jackets, and Silver is supposed to represent a combination of all the various agencies working together. But the DC Silver Jackets team, it's co-led by the Corps, myself, and the Department of Energy and Environment. We have over 20 agencies represented. A lot of federal agencies, the Corps, FEMA, Weather Service, Park Service, USGS, EPA, National Capital Planning Commission, even military, such as NAVFAC. And then a lot of district agencies, such as, like I said, Energy and Environment, Emergency Management, Office of Planning, Transportation, DC Water, more. We have some regional agencies and academia, Georgetown. So basically, we all get together, we meet quarterly, we learn about each other's flood-related programs and projects. We establish task groups for certain issues that we want to tackle, and we try to leverage our resources whenever possible. And we also work on just a lot of interagency projects together. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Stacey. Now to turn to Melissa Deas, Melissa, who is with DC Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. Melissa, can you tell us about the role of the Chief Resilience Officer here in DC and the DC resilience efforts and plans and your current priorities in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the formal legislative mission for the Chief Resilience Officer is to develop short and long-term strategies that promote adaptation and resilience to the district's economy, communities, infrastructure, and natural resources in response to shocks and stressors. So that's a big mission. It can incorporate a lot of different things. What that looks like day to day is that we have a resilient DC strategy that came out in 2019 that identifies 68 different objectives organized into 4 different goals and 2 different focus areas that we are working on implementing. By design, the resilience strategy and sort of what you heard in that legislative mission, it is much bigger than just natural hazards and climate change. But climate change is one of those 4 goals that are in the plan and is certainly a focus. Also by design, the resilient DC strategy to a certain extent comes up with some new policies, but really what it does more than that is it elevates and creates a megaphone for policies that existed in other plans throughout the district and tries to create the nexus between those. Right, the Climate Ready DC plan identified that the district is getting warmer, wetter, wilder. That's how we sort of short phrase the climate impacts that we're expecting to see in the district. And what the Resilient DC plan does is say, yes, we also agree with that. And we want to underscore some of those and underscore some of the things that are in there. And so we want to push us even further to incorporate climate projections into land use, building regulations, capital investments. And we're going to move forward the target that we're going to ensure all new buildings are built to be climate resilient by 2032, that we're going to design climate ready neighborhoods and developments and integrate that into all of the work that our Office of Planning is doing, that we're going to measure and track climate risks, and really think about how we're looking at adaptation progress and do annual progress reporting around that, that we're going to increase resilience to climate change at the neighborhood and household level, because that's where we really see all of the different ways that climate and economics and health and cyber and everything are coming together in one location. And so we need to do things if we care about economic health, like increase the affordability and adoption of flood insurance. But the plan also, like I said, has 3 other sections. It has a section on inclusive growth, and that's really to say that if people don't have jobs that they can rely on, steady work, savings accounts, all of those things, that they're going to be much more vulnerable in disasters. And we have to think about that, that if people don't have affordable housing to go to when they are hit by a disaster, then we see widespread displacement. And so we have to make sure that we have housing that can absorb people after we experience shocks and stressors. It has a section on health, recognizing, as we all saw in the last year, that there are huge health disparities that make certain populations much more sensitive to extreme weather and hazards. So we have to deal with that. It has a section on technology and thinking about the future of work and cybersecurity. And I know that this session has Octo, our partners that are working on that, talking about some of that in much more detail, but recognizing that all of those create the infrastructure in which we communicate with people during shocks and stressors, and make our city more resilient. So it really is a broad plan that's meant to draw those connections.
Stacey, so we've just heard Chris say that that we're getting more extremes, or we're seeing some trends on extreme precipitation and weather, and Melissa just pointed out that they're concerned about a wetter future and wetter current. In that context, can you tell us about some of the projects that the DC Silver Jackets are currently undertaking?
Sure, yeah. Our DC Silver Jackets team has been very busy lately, and I think will continue to be. And yeah, Melissa, Chris, they're all on the team. So it's great to have them here on the panel today. So just so you understand a little bit about our projects, we can do any type of work together that we want to collaborate, but there is a certain program through Silver Jackets that all the state Silver Jackets teams can submit proposals, interagency proposals each year to compete for core funds, so that the core can actually work with other agencies on these flood-related projects. So they're really interesting, kind of cool projects. No money's exchanged between the different agencies. All the agencies basically just bring their expertise and their resources to the table. And typically we'll have, 5 to 10 agencies working on a project together. But some of the recent projects, the one we recently completed was the Watts Branch Flood Risk Management Study in Southeast DC. So a lot of different tasks, but the biggest ones we conducted new flood modeling, flood mapping to understand what's at stake, what's vulnerable in the area. We identified various flood risk management solutions, evaluated them, made some recommendations, and now DC actually has received a FEMA grant to further pursue those projects for design and construction. So it's just a good example of leveraging resources that we were able to do the initial work through Silver Jackets, and hopefully FEMA grants can help implement them. Also last year, we did a lot of flood risk outreach. We had our first ever DC Flood Awareness Week in June. That was exciting. The main messages were for people to know their flood risk and take action to reduce their flood risk. We had just a lot of outreach. We put signs in the metro trains and buses about purchasing flood insurance. We targeted insurance campaign for renters. We held some public webinars about flood awareness and actions that they can take. We actually did some testing of installing barriers at a few buildings. We installed some high watermark signs. So just a whole lot of outreach. And that's what was great for interagency, a lot of different agencies doing that. A few other projects, right now we're currently also working to address the stormwater flooding problem at the Federal Triangle. We had a number of workshops, charrette. We're doing a flood damage assessment there, trying to figure out a way that we could help work together and help relieve the flooding there. DC is also leading a project now to develop an integrated flood model for DC. It's going to incorporate riverine, coastal, and interior stormwater flooding to solve these complex problems. And DC Silver Jackets agencies are going to be helping advise that. And then lastly, the project for this year is we're going to be holding a DC flood exercise in June 2022 to test the district and federal emergency response plans. So lots of different things going on. Those are the most recent ones.
Great, thanks. I'd like to turn to Chris. Chris, information, data, forecasting, it's all really critical to all of these actions, both for immediate events and for future planning. Can you tell us about some of the new forecasting tools that you have to assist in preparedness and response?
Sure, let me dare the tech gods here and pull up a slide to back me while I'm talking. Hold on just one second. So it really is a few different things. It's not just tools. First of all, it's the forecast behind everything. Because if you have cool tools and there's, it's hollow, the forecast isn't worth it behind it. You don't have anything. So the forecasting from meteorologists really continues to evolve over time. And it's really telling over, 10 years, certainly 20 years, the 30 years that I've been doing this, how far we've come. And every year it gets just a little bit better. We get to see a little further out with a little more clarity, catch more and more of the storms, fewer and fewer surprises. So that's one of the big advancements that continues to take place behind the scenes. But then once we have that improved, better forecast, having ways to communicate that forecast is a really important part, because if you have the forecast and nobody understands it, again, you're nowhere. So one of the tools that we had just recently for our big tidal event that we had, some of the biggest tides we've had in a generation in Washington at the end of October last month. And being able to go from, the gauge is going to get to 7 feet, that's for the people that have plans and know that, when the gauge gets to 7 feet, we need to do X, Y, and Z. That's great. But for everybody else in the city that doesn't routinely deal with this, it's like, all right, it's going to get to 7 feet. What does that mean? What do we have to do? What are going to be the problem areas? And with the Silver Jackets, with Stacey in the group, one of the big advancements just over the past few years is being able to map that inundation. So when that tidal surge does come up into Washington, being able to show it on a map like is on the middle of the screen here for those that can see, and say, all right, here's the areas that are most likely to go underwater and get inundated when the tide gets to this level. And it really allows the city and Melissa and all the groups that deal with this in mitigation to be able to focus their efforts and say, all right, well, these are the areas we have to protect. These are the areas we might have to evacuate. These are the roads that potentially we have to close off. And every forecast comes with a little bit of uncertainty that you have to gauge against. But this is a great starting point, not only for the government entities, but also just for everybody that has to make decisions for their property, be able to see this on a map and see the areas that are most likely affected. And this will be great for hurricanes and along the coastline. And anytime you're dealing with inundation, being able to show people on a map that their house is going to be under 4 feet of water is a much more powerful tool to get them to evacuate than some more abstract concept of what the water level is going to get to on the coastline. So having the improved forecast, having visualization tools like this inundation mapping is one, for example. And then also having the communication tool of being able to reach people when you need to. And wireless emergency alerts has done so much for awareness for extreme weather events. And National Weather Service is just one input into wireless emergency alerts that hits everybody's cell phones more or less when they're activated. But the Weather Service does use it sparingly for tornado warnings, for storm surge warnings and hurricanes, and just a few more catastrophic flash flood warnings, for example. So anytime that we issue one of these warnings, an alert goes out to everybody that's within the threat zone saying, hey, a tornado warning or a flash flood warning has just been issued for your area. It allows people to get that bell ringer that something's going on. And most of the time they're going to confirm that with other sources, but at least it quickly gets the train moving in their mind that something's going wrong and they might have to do something about it. So those three things together, the forecasts, the visualization tools, and just the communication tools, social media, all the things that we use, and then that alerting way to tap people when you really need to. All three of those have done wonders for advancing threat communication here in the Washington metro area in the NCR.
Great, thanks, Chris. Great to see those advances in tools, not only in the tools themselves, but in the access and accessibility of those tools and information to people in this whole crowd who are joining us today. Melissa, as we look at, so DC is the seat of the federal government and also a city unto itself. As you're looking and working through the resilience plan, is there anything that the federal government can do to assist in the development and implementation of this plan? And what about opportunities to partner or participate with DC and your office in this work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I would say that the federal government is already a really essential partner for all of the work that we're doing. And we're so thankful that we have such great federal partners. In fact, the map that you're seeing behind me is an urban heat island map that was developed through a NOAA program. The National Weather Service is definitely a strong partner for us. The Army Corps of Engineers and Stacey's team is hugely helpful before every weather event, helping us think through what we need to be even thinking about. And then through the Silver Jackets, helping us come up with policies. So just first want to say thank you before I start pointing out some of the additional things that we might need. But I would say that the two big buckets of additional things that we need is for the federal government to address the climate change risks on their own property. About 85% of Washington's DC shoreline is owned by the federal government. Much of that's administered and managed by the National Park Services and the Department of Defense. And what that means is that, to a certain extent, we could put all of the protections that we want on the properties that we own, but it's not going to make a difference if stormwater comes in through Fort McNair and floods our Buzzard Point neighborhoods. So we need that flood management to happen on those federal properties. And we can come up with really innovative solutions to do living shorelines or to do big infrastructure improvements, but we're going to need some of that to happen on federal properties. So we already work a lot with those federal partners. We need more of that, and we need to figure out how to streamline some of that. And then the second thing that we need is just increasing flexibility in some of these federal programs. The district has been really innovative and really successful with using FEMA's hazard mitigation grant dollars and through the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities and flood mitigation assistant grants to start some projects that we're really excited about. We're doing the first microgrid funded through the BRIC program at one of our hospitals to provide backup power. We're exploring blue-green infrastructure in two of our park spaces in our Southwest neighborhood and really trying to figure out what a connected park system looks like. Those are exciting, but we also have risks that sit in other parts of the district and risks beyond just sort of the things that people think about as risks. So we really haven't figured out how to do extreme heat work because there's no clear way to do a benefit cost analysis for some of those projects and put those forward. So that's a challenge. Another challenge is that a lot of our flood risk is in individual people's homes, and elevation in filling in basements is just not an option for all of those people. So how do we create programs where we're installing flood smart vents in people's homes and deploy those at scale? That's really hard to do given the constraints of how the funding is put together. And then also, how do we think about sort of those bigger questions of resilience? If we need resilience hubs in all of our communities, and that's one of the most popular things that comes up when we go and talk to constituents, maybe what we need funding for is to provide Wi-Fi at those recreation centers or community centers that's resilient, to provide showers, to have kitchens that have the ability to refrigerate medicines and to serve people during those disasters. And that's not the kind of thing that's typically funded. So it's really just about pushing the limits on what we can do, and being creative with additional sources.
I'll open it up to the rest of the panel. Any other comments on what can be done for both assisting in DC and working together towards resilience and hazard mitigation in the context of climate change?
Yes, I'll just add, I definitely agree with everything Melissa just said. As far as federal lands, the Corps, at least for the military installations, I mean, we have been working with, I know Washington Navy Yard, Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, Fort McNair. They're all concerned about the flood risk also. So I know they've reached out to the Corps at different times to try to assist. So that is something that's being looked at. I know there's also a military installation resilience review now that COG is doing to look at vulnerabilities. So it's definitely on folks' minds. I think getting budgeting to make things get in the ground is going to be the challenge. But that's all I would add.
And I mean, it really is teamwork, not just amongst our groups that we're already doing that with, but teamwork through the group that's on the call here, the federal sector, through the communities that are within the national and capital region, because the people that get into trouble from the weather side of things through these extreme events are oftentimes the people that aren't connected, that don't have a strong connection or a partnership or interest in weather, whether it's the individual all the way up to installations. So teamwork is just such a huge part of being able to know when these are coming, mitigate, prepare, and also on the front end, like Melissa was talking about, and Stacey was talking about, being able to prepare before the event so it's less impactful when they do come.
Great, thanks. Stacey, back to the Silver Jackets. Can you tell us about a success story from your work in the district that's had a big impact on day-to-day dealing with these kinds of hazards and challenges?
Yeah, I think, really just like the day-to-day coordination, collaboration has been significant. I must admit, in these last 10 years, all these relationships that we built between all the different agency representatives have been huge. I think it helps everybody to, do their jobs more effectively, reach a wider audience. I mean, we have had a number of successes. I would say probably, one of the biggest ones we had is the one that Chris just mentioned, was that flood inundation mapping. That tool that he showed, that was developed, that was a Silver Jackets interagency project that's out there for the public now. And I know the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency, they really rely on DC Silver Jackets. Now we actually established a group called the Flood Technical Advisory Group, the FTAG, that they can activate. Either Weather Service or HCMA can activate it. And they did both just a few weeks ago with the coastal flooding, they did during Hurricane Ida. And what that does is, like Chris said, instead of just hearing at gauge what stage it's going to be, the FTAG actually has representatives come to their meetings, show the mapping, really talk about what areas are going to be impacted. And I know that helps HCMA greatly just for their emergency response. So I'd say that was really kind of a game changer. Thanks.
Good to hear. So James, turning to you. Flooding has been an issue in Washington, D.C. for over 100 years. and certainly longer than that, and given the setting in which we are located. With the changing climate, if we don't enact change, we should expect to see more flooding than ever. And most recently, severe flooding events affected the National Archives in June 2006 and July 2019. Can you tell us what happened during those flooding events and how the National Archives has mitigated flooding hazards since then?
Sure. Let me share my screen. Yeah, well, flooding at the National Archives is not new. This is pictures are from the first year that we were open in 1936. And in these two exact locations is where we put up our flood walls. The flood in 2006, during the 2006 flood, we had inundation in our west moat, which is on the 9th Street side. This flooded our main switchgear room together with our theater and basement offices. We were closed about 1 month, and repair costs were around $3 million. And that was just direct costs. After this, we installed flood measures. We installed two self-rising walls. They're in the little green boxes there. We did self-sealing doors, waterproof doors on all the external ground level in those yellow zones. And we did a system of sensors throughout the building in our building management system. This is a page of our Siemens building control system that shows what we have today. So going back to it, we also established flood posturing, basically flood tours for our staff and our contractors when a rain event is occurring. So in July of 19, that morning, I was actually looking at the flood inundation map that Chris had just put up. And our flood measures deployed that morning. And it was an extreme rainfall event. But this time we were inundated through our electrical switchgear feeders, the 3 main feeders for the building. The seals failed and it started pouring down onto our switchgear. And since we were on a flood tour at the time, and we knew our vulnerabilities, we were able to take the breakers out rather than let them disconnect. And this enabled us to recover in about 30 hours rather than the month. As you can see, we also installed switchgear disconnects by the door of the vault. That was one of our flood measures. So we were able to recover from this inundation and flood in 2019 in about 30 hours and somewhere under $30,000 in cost. So it's kind of a success story and also a cautionary tale. Of course, Pepco was our big partner in this, in resealing the feeders. And in 2019, though, what made the big difference was vigilance and the training, because the inundation occurred in an area we had no idea of predicting. We thought we were already covered. And since we had worked with our crew and we were doing our tours, we observed the flooding before our system told us that we were flooding, and we're able to disconnect breakers and just take care of lots of cost. So we partner with Silver Jackets, of course, in their flood awareness stuff. And I have to admit, the NOAA flood inundation maps were critical that morning because we knew to be on point. So yeah, that's that's my story.
Great, those are powerful pictures, and also that reinforces the multi-level attention and response that's required to keep buildings safe. So that's what you've experienced to date and recently. As you look towards a changing climate and these new normals that on heat and temperature that Chris was talking about, and the wetter, wilder situation that Melissa pointed to, how does that inform the plans that you have going forward to prepare for those future events?
Well, we have more small mitigation projects. We can never budget it in a large group, but we can always chip at it bit by bit. So we're sealing more duct banks. We're doing foundation perimeter work and other small projects bit by bit. Some of the projects from 2006 weren't completed until 2017. So we just keep at it when we have the opportunity to. And of course, the biggest thing is the training and the corporate memory. I can't install resilience. I can't physically buy vigilance on the GSA Advantage website and bring it to my building and install it. I have to develop that. So for me, the vigilance comes from dedication. So keeping it in corporate memory so that my bosses realize what I have to budget and what I'm fighting, and training my internal crew, letting them know, hey, it's raining. You should be checking the NOAA inundation flood map and doing your tour. So these are the response in posture, I think, is what's going to last, because floods are very unique. They have a way of finding their way around your best preparations. So you have to keep it in your corporate memory and keep your staff on their toes. And I know that no matter what I do, the weather's going to find a way through. So my people are the ones that are going to do the most for me.
Great. Thanks for keeping that building and safe, and also developing some lessons that others can follow. Unfortunately, that was built out of some challenging experiences. Yep. Good to have lessons from those. So following up on that, I'd be interested in hearing from the other panelists if how those future conditions as we understand them are informing work that you have going forward. So Chris, for example, what are some of the tools that you may are hoping to bring forward to help people understand and move on these hazards? And Melissa, you have a plan that was developed in 2019, so relatively recently, but you've also been involved in Climate Ready DC that preceded that. What are some of the new challenges that you're seeing that you need to address? Why don't we start with Melissa?
Sure. So I think extreme heat is one of the biggest risks for the district. And so the Department of Energy and Environment has recently, or it is very soon to release a comprehensive heat strategy for the district, which will outline specific policies for how we think about sort of two different categories of addressing extreme heat. One is how do we actually start fighting the urban heat island effect and start cooling down the city systematically? How do we be more thoughtful about where we're planting trees, what kinds of trees we're planting, what shade structures we're providing, cool pavements, cool roofs, building design, all of those questions. And then the second category of how do we make sure that we're keeping people safe, because we're going to have hot days no matter what. So how do we better prepare people for knowing what the signs of heat stroke and heat stress are? How do we make sure people know how to ventilate their homes? How do we increase access to cool spaces during those high heat days that people actually want to go to? And so I think that's a really big question for us, given that heat is actually the #1 killer in the United States.
And from the weather side of things, yeah, I mean, that's definitely key. Heat is another big thing. Heat's the biggest indirect killer. Flooding's the biggest direct killer, but it just all becomes on how you look at the numbers. They're both bad. And as it's really been, heat waves come and go over the years and several years, and it's really been about a decade since we had our last patch of extraordinarily hot weather in the early 2010s. It's always hot here in the summertime, but there's those days that are really dangerously hot when they start getting far and above the normal. And when that does come back again next summer or the summer after, or whenever it does come back, and we get one of those exceptional heat waves, which potentially could even be more exceptional than what we've seen in the past, that's one of the definite things we need to be ready for. And one of the things that the meteorology community in partnership with the community at large has done is mapped out the microclimates within the district and the National Capital Region. And what you can see is, the district is a small footprint, and there are areas in the district that are 10 or 15 degrees warmer than other areas just because of the trees and versus pavement, buildings versus green space. And oftentimes those hottest parts of the city are in underserved areas. And that's one of the big challenges we're going to have collectively in the years ahead, is how to better prepare, reach, alert those communities who are most at harm's way in a big major heat wave.
Great, thanks. So a follow-up, Chris, and I'm going to bring in a question from the audience as part of this. So first part, what do emergency managers and their partners in the National Capital Region need to know to prepare, and what do they need to prepare for in the next 20 years? And then given the tools that you all are developing, including the visualization that you presented, how do emergency managers and folks concerned with these hazards access and learn about those tools and learn how to use those tools?
When it comes to emergency managers, weather drives a lot of emergency management's business when it comes down to it, because a lot of the threats that are out there that need to be planned against are all the weather threats that we get here in the National Capital Region. So certainly a strong partnership with the National Weather Service that serves the National Capital Region is key, just to be able to stay on top of the events as they're first coming to light, as they near the area, as details get clear, and just be ready for it. And then the other big thing, I liked warmer, wetter, wilder in the district, because it is really all about mitigation, preparing for these events, but not just preparing. It's preparing against these things where the baselines are shifting, where things are becoming warmer and wetter and wilder, and what might have worked and what plans might have been great 20 or 30 years ago, especially when it comes to water and flooding, but everything in general, that might not work anymore. And I know Ellicott City, Maryland, not too far outside the National Capital Region footprint, they're dealing with what to do with their infrastructure that was built for things that that are happening now that didn't used to happen before. So now, and how do we protect our population so we don't have casualties, fatalities, and as much damage when we do get these flooding events? So just having that weather connection for information from the National Weather Service, whether it's through the webpage or directly through our office, weather.gov/Washington, and then also working towards evolving these mitigation plans that we all have to make sure that they're keeping up with the times and the weather threats that we're getting with increasing ferocity here in the DC area.
So specifically to the question from the audience, to get to the visualization tool, can you get there through the weather.gov/Washington?
Yeah, for Washington, that flood inundation mapping, if you go to weather.gov/Washington, which is the main springboard page, and you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see an icon for rivers and lakes. You click on the rivers portion there, and that'll take you to a map that shows all the different forecast points in our area, but also within the National Capital Region. You click on one of the points that we forecast for, it'll show you the graph, and then one of the tabs you'll also see is inundation mapping that will be able to access that map that shows you, what the river is going to inundate when it gets to X level.
Great, well, thanks for that. So with that, we've come to the end of our panel session, and so thank you for that background on all of the work that you're doing, the investments that have been made in recent years in resilience and hazard mitigation, and this attention to flooding and other hazards. And we look forward to bringing that back into the work of all of the group here in the audience today. So we now have time for questions from the audience. And so please put those questions into the question and answer, and we will work through those in the time that we have left. I'm going to start with one question for both Stacey and Melissa. Your efforts in your discussions, Melissa, you talked about resilience being a multidisciplinary and multi-hazard effort, and Stacey, you are integrating and coordinating across a whole bunch of agencies. Do you have some quick lessons on that kind of coordination? How do you get people who have different agendas and missions to work together around some challenging issues that are all shared? Stacey? Is Stacey stuck?
Stacey looks like she might be stuck, so
Uh,
maybe I can jump in first.
Yes, please do, Melissa.
So one, I would say that we're really lucky in the district of having great partners who generally are generally pretty easy to work with. As Stacey mentioned, there are, while we have that challenge that a lot of our shoreline is federally controlled, generally speaking, we have found that our federal partners have been interested in solutions and willing to work with us. And I think the trick is just to sort of make sure that everybody knows what the mutual benefits will be, because it's not just us, right? Like the bases are concerned about flooding for their own purposes, but if they do their flood controls without talking to us, it might not integrate in a way that's going to provide the maximum benefits for everyone. So just making sure that we're all at the table is a really big goal of our agency and of the district in general, is making sure that we're bringing in the partners at the right time from the beginning so that we can even get to those best solutions out there. So when there are tricky things, which there are, and it generally comes down to bureaucracy and funding and making those things work, we just have to be as creative as we can. And they try and get through some of those sticky issues, whether it's transferring land or figuring out how to be creative about a cost share. But that's really where the challenges come more than the will.
Stacey, any insights from you on enabling cross agency and jurisdiction coordination and collaboration?
Yeah, that is certainly a challenge, and I'm sorry I dropped off for a second, so I didn't hear the whole question. And but yeah, it sounds like I just looked at the question, I guess about the federal lands and the DC lands. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. We're already looking, finding that with Buzzard Point area, with National Park Service land, Fort McNair, DC land. It's a challenge we're working through. We all have our own programs and authorities, and they don't always seem to mesh. So it's just something that we're going to continue to work through.
Great, thanks. So a question from the audience, and this is both for Melissa and James. Melissa mentioned DC goals for climate-ready buildings. Could you amplify the definition of a climate-ready facility? And I'll actually turn to James first and say, James, if you were working with some of your partners in other federal buildings, how would you talk to them about a climate-ready facility based on your experience?
Well, you have to examine your vulnerabilities and pour money and effort into those immediately. Because if we did not have the flood walls in July of 2019, the 2006 flood would have happened all over again. Climate ready is also kind of neighborhood ready. Through Stacey's work with Silver Jackets, I have a better contact network. So July of 2019, I was able to pick up the phone and call National Gallery and say, what's going on with you guys? So climate ready is also neighborhood ready. And you have to have a posture with your crew. If you have a staff in your building, to be ready for the unexpected or the expected. So being climate ready is just the investment in your vulnerabilities and training of your crew.
Investment in hard and soft responses. So Melissa, what's your question?
So how the district thinks about this is traditionally when you build a building, you look at historic risks to make certain decisions. And the difference with climate change is looking at the projections to make many of those same decisions. So we developed some resilient design guidelines that outline how to incorporate our climate models into those sort of decision making. What is a 15-year design storm in the future? What is the number of cooling degree days that you might want to think about in the future to right size your HVAC unit? So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about climate ready, is really using those forward-looking approaches in the basic building design and assumptions. And then what that design guideline does also is say, okay, so you've identified that you have increased flood risk, you've identified that you have increased heat. Here are some of the things that you might do about it. You might think about a green roof. You might think about thinking about vector-borne diseases and, you know, doing more mosquito netting or whatever it is. And so having all of those strategies ready to go so that building developers can think a little bit more creatively about how they go around designing.
Right. And for people who are interested, where would they go to find those design guidelines?
So they can be found on the Department of Energy and Environment's website under the Climate Ready DC page. I can also send around a link through whatever channels are possible.
Great, thanks. So Chris, question for you. With these new tools, but also the demands of the group that we're talking with today about needing to understand not only the current events when they're happening in the weather world, but projecting and planning and building for future events. How do you see the National Weather Service evolving in your role and the way that you work, the way that you partner, and the kinds of information and tools that you'll be developing as you're going forward?
More and more, it's interpreting and being a service to help decision makers, especially government decision makers, in the years ahead. And we actually adapted our mission statement just recently to add that in, because it has become such a core function of what we do. In addition to forecasting the weather, you know, if you just put the forecast out and that's that, the community is going to suffer. You really need to help the community with that information that you're putting out to help decisions, help those decision makers make good decisions, because you're there, you know, through some means of communication to help them with those big decisions that they have to make. So, you know, at the same time, we can't be in everybody's room, you know, having one-on-one conversation. So it's finding the balance of being able to use tools where we can blast a number of people and also still being more interactive, especially with the biggest decision makers for any given weather event.
Great, thanks. So with that, I think we have reached the end of our time, and this has been a view into what's happening in the district. We welcome an audience from across the National Capital Region, and so hope that the lessons and experiences that we shared here this morning are useful and helpful to across everyone who's gathered today, and hopefully we'll be all talking to each other as we address these shared hazards across the National Capital Region. So in closing, I'd like to thank our panelists and viewers for your participation today. It's been a great discussion.